Hi, I'm Drew Levanti, and welcome back to Elections Weekly, a show where we journey through the week ahead with electional astrology. Super happy to have everybody back this week. Usually these videos come out on Mondays. This week it's coming out on Tuesday because, by God, there's a full moon in my 10th house and I'm busy as hell. One thing that I'm super busy with that I'd love to invite you to is I'll be speaking at the Big Apple Astrology Meetup, which is the astrology meetup in New York. And I'll be speaking on Saturn in Love. So there'll be information on that in the video description. It's happening next Tuesday, and I'd love to see folks come to that. I'm pretty sure it's just donation based. So yeah, so it should be super accessible for everybody to come to that. And I'd love to see you there. Additionally, I wanted to let everybody know that I have somewhat more limited availability coming up for March and April, just because I'll be traveling. And then I'll also be speaking at Norwac in May. So the next few months get a little bit busier for me and I won't have quite as much calendar availability. So if you are interested in getting a reading with me, doing an attunement session for your natal chart, or looking into some elections, some personalized elections for you, it would be good to get that on the books now, as I will be a little bit busier and less available for consultations over the next few months. Of course, those links will also be in the video description. So our Wednesday chart for the week is at the very end of Wednesday. It's got 11:57 p.m. with about 15 degrees of Scorpio rising. We're shooting for Scorpio rising here because Mars is just kicking some major ass in Capricorn. It's conjunct Venus, so it's bona fide. It's, conjunct the sect benefic at night, and it also has a sextile with Jupiter. It's configured well to the moon. So there's so much flow in this chart. There's so much earthy flow in this chart where there's a capacity for building something, and there's a resourcefulness. There's power in being able to work with exactly what you have, not straining to create something that you don't have, but being incredibly aware and aligned with the resources that are available. And part of that emphasis on resources comes from the emphasis on Earth in the chart, and part of it comes from the moon's opposition with Jupiter, where the moon, again, is in an Earth sign, and its contact to Jupiter makes it a contact to the ruler of the second. And so there's a sense of being well-resourced, and the oppositions are about staring something down, like knowing what's looking across from you. With Jupiter ruling the second, these resources are bountiful and they're very available for the ruler of the ascendant as well as the ascendant itself. We have Jupiter trining the ascendant, Jupiter in this sextile still with Venus and Mars. And so this opposition with Jupiter for the moon is really supporting it in this post full moon phase, also known as the disseminating phase. The full moon that happened at 28 degrees of Aquarius, actually, it is still yet to happen here. And the moon's in mid Leo right now as I'm talking about this. So we're still building up to it. And I do find full moons to be a little overwhelming sometimes, especially in an electional context, and also even by transit. So this aspect to Jupiter coming off of the full moon is soothing a bit. And it is telling the moon that it's worth it. Like, you've grown, you've come all this way, you've made your way halfway around this cycle, and the heights that you've seen. And there's still more to go. There's still more opportunities to grow, and particularly to share. This disseminating phase of the moon is a lot about sharing what has been learned on this journey. So with the moon being pretty angular in this chart and in the 11th sign, there is a sense of sharing what you know with the community. The ascendant ruler being in the third house is also oriented toward communication, and having it be with Venus, there's something helpful about this chart, very helpful. That emphasis on Earth, bringing something down to earth, even though the moon is up there, way up in the sky. Sometimes the most hopeful and even philosophical things can have the most practical impacts. Like when you say something that's true and it changes the way that you look at things. I've been thinking a lot about waiting recently with elections and in life, because a lot of times when people come, and so now we're thinking about the Saturn stuff in this chart where Saturn is squaring the ascendant and waiting, Saturn is pro waiting, I would say. I would say that an unlearned person in terms of Saturn, someone who has a lot to learn with Saturn, will either not wait long enough, not let themselves mature long enough, or they will wait too long and miss an opportunity. A lot of times Saturn can represent analysis paralysis, giving too much over to fear, allowing fear to stop action. And so with waiting, this Saturn and this way that Saturn is shaping this chart by squaring the ascendant, I've been thinking about waiting, and what I've been thinking about it is that waiting is fine and waiting is good, but we shouldn't wait because we're afraid, and we shouldn't be afraid to wait either. And so it's a little bit of a paradox in a way. But I think at the end of the day, Saturn is about knowing the time that you have and using it well. And with Saturn here in the 4th house, the sun also in the 4th house, speaking in a whole sign perspective, of course, and Mercury also there in the 4th house, knowing the time that you have, knowing the time that the world has, being sensitive to constraints of the land, constraints of the world that is providing for you, the foundation, the roots of things, the systems that provide, and being able to share, again, like back to the moon and Jupiter stuff, being able to share an optimistic message about things that might seem a little bit cold or overwhelming, finding the best way forward, finding the exalted Mars kinds of actions and the moon in Virgo kinds of analyses and data that can assist and find the best way forward in the context of the constraints of the earth, the constraints of our time on earth. That's what feels relevant for this chart at the moment. Our Thursday chart is lovely. It's at 7:12 a.m. It's got about 8 degrees of Pisces rising. What I've done here is I've put the descendant to be conjunct the moon. And I would recommend doing the same in your location. If you can't get a Leo moon, or if you can't get a Virgo moon in your location for this election, I'm sad for you. But it's a lovely chart. And there's probably other rising signs that you can work with once the moon does go into Virgo. So just kind of explore that for yourself. The reason that I put the moon on the descendant and what that means to me is that it shows an offer of something to somebody else. So with the Pisces rising and Jupiter being conjunct the ascendant in the way that it is, we are ourselves as the person initiating this, we're being very generous and hopeful and certainly putting on a good show. Now that Jupiter is in Pisces, now that Jupiter is in the second decan, like the second 10-degree subsection of Pisces, it's in its own face. It's in its own decan. And so this has a lot to do with appearing well. There's a difference sometimes between talent and showability. Sometimes people are really good at appearing publicly in a way. even greater than the extent of their talent or their sort of innate capabilities at this thing. And so that's how I think about decans. And so this Jupiter is not only talented, not only very capable of delivering on the promises of Jupiter, but it's also really good at looking like it's doing that, which gives it an extra layer of power that is really great. And so with the moon, again, still opposing Jupiter and situated on the descendant, it's giving something. You know, the moon in the chart shows what is receiving attention at this particular moment, what is being nurtured. Sometimes we like to put the moon on the ascendant with us to nurture us, only if it's in good condition though. And sometimes we like to give it to others. And so this is a chart where you're being helpful. You're being very helpful. In particular, we see that the ruler of the 7th is this Mercury in the 12th, which shows a certain remoteness between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 7th, between whoever is receiving this thing and ourselves. There's a distance between us where, you know, it could simply be that we haven't seen each other for a while, or we're in different places. Maybe this person is traveling, or maybe you just don't live in the same place. And so the moon there helps establish contact for somebody who is kind of doing their own thing at the moment, but they might really appreciate receiving this. This is probably when I'll email Shannon back, because the moon is again, like, if you remember, yeah, sure, her book just said hi again when I said her name. The moon is still, the moon is contacting that 8-9 degrees of water and earth that was, anyway, you could compare this to the charts that I showed earlier, and you'll see like why this is the sort of logical extension of that. So yeah, in terms of, you know, this is not like a good contract chart necessarily, because usually for that I would want to see some agreement and some line of sight between the ruler of the 1st and the ruler of the 7th, but it is really good for helping somebody and giving somebody a hopeful message. The Venus-Mars conjunction in the 11th is interesting. It's configured well to the moon, so it's definitely helpful for the chart as a whole. Everything that we've said about Pisces rising charts before is still relevant here, where, you know, there's power for extending our reach and for building alliances and getting people who are helpful on our side, as well as offering our help for others. And so this is a chart where all of those themes continue. As we move along, we're still going to be using a lot of Pisces risings in this show, and we'll see how the stories change a little bit when Venus and Mars get closer to Pluto. At the moment, it's not extreme. Pluto, extreme. Haha, didn't mean to say that. But that contact is not too intense. But it's still there. And you might have noticed that I don't put a lot of outer planets in these, like when I'm putting up the charts, I don't put outer planets because I think it gets a little bit busy and it's not necessarily my focus when I'm doing elections. But when there's exact contacts to outer planets, there are exact contacts to outer planets, and that's going to matter. So we'll see how that story changes as we move forward. Our next chart for the week is Friday, and it's Pisces season. And this is an election that focuses on Pisces season, on the sun's ingress into Pisces. It's at 12:05 p.m. It's got late Gemini rising, but the point is to have the sun culminating. And this won't be possible in all latitudes, but either way, the sun's going to be in the 10th sign. I've set it here in Chicago so that the sun is exactly on the MC. And this happens to fall during the planetary hour of the sun. So it's an angular planet it's an angular planet that rules the hour. And with this ingress, you know, I find that the cusp between Aquarius and Pisces is so magical. this is a great chart to kind of explore what that cusp is like. And it's going to depend, for you, what houses in your natal chart those signs are in. That, the Pisces part of your chart, like for example, if you have Aries rising, the sun going into your 12th house might not be like the most enjoyable thing, but maybe it is. For me, it goes into my 5th house when it enters Pisces. And so I always find that to be just lovely. The moon is void here by pretty much by most definitions that people use. There's several definitions of the void moon, and the one that I work with is that if the moon isn't making any aspects to traditional planets within 13 degrees of its subsequent motion, that this shows that there's a lack of progress or lack of forward motion in something. And so while I don't stick to this as like a dogma for myself, like, I'll still send emails when the moon is void. I'll still do things. It's not like I'm just covering up and, going into some underground bunker somewhere because I'm afraid. The void moon is a time when I find that there can be a certain lethargy or a wandering quality of these times. And with the sun ingressing into Pisces, maybe that wandering is amped up a little bit. Like there's a sense that we could go anywhere and we don't know where it's going to be, and how nice that can be sometimes, especially after so much emphasis on Saturn, which is still present in this chart, but it could be a little bit of a breather in a way. So the ruler of the ascendant in this chart is Mercury. It's in the 9th. It's co-present with Saturn. Mercury's still retracing its steps, and it has a lot to say at this time. Mercury in an air sign can be quite eloquent. And with the support of a strong ruler as Saturn is here, there's a talent with talking about the past or talking about expertise, something that you know a lot about, and being able to offer perspectives from that place of experience. It can also be a good chart for receiving. Mercury is being received by Saturn with this co-presence, receiving wisdom or receiving insight or the expertise of somebody else. The 9th house, where Mercury and Saturn are situated in this chart, is not only about prediction, astrology, and God. We could, that traditional association of the 9th house as God also has to do with like the state and ideology and the sort of structures of thought that are imposed from above in a way. Got so much to say about the 9th house, but that's for a later time. But the 9th house also is like legal matters and lawyers and advice, counsel. And so with a strong Saturn ruling the 9th, there is an offer of very useful, constructive, not necessarily like good news kind of advice, but it's useful, and this is advice that you can get access to. If we look at the ruler of the 7th, so like if you were contacting somebody for advice, the ruler of the 7th is this really powerful Jupiter that's at the top of the chart. And so that combination of a strong 9th ruler, a strong 10th ruler, and Mercury, the ruler of the ascendant, is being received by the ruler of the 9th. It's a good chart for booking an astrology reading, I would say. So, links below. But seriously, like if you're looking for advice on something, this is a chart to seek it out. It might focus on maybe a place. It might focus on the 4th house. With the moon being void in the 4th house, there might be a sense of uncertainty, or like you're looking for a place to live. So maybe this could be a good chart for like real estate and looking for help with real estate. Yeah, I think that would make sense with the moon in the 4th house. Our Saturday chart is at 5:22 a.m. So this one's for all the early risers out there. It's got 1 degree of Aquarius rising, so make sure in your location that you do have Aquarius rising. And Mercury is conjunct the ascendant. It is the hour of Mercury too, and that's why I chose this particular chart. So Mercury on the ascendant. This is said to be the place of Mercury's joy. The ascendant is where the chart speaks, and Mercury is that which speaks. So this is an excellent chart for delivering information, delivering something that's technical and that requires a lot of skill to articulate. It's a great chart for simply writing something, journaling, or maybe even something that's like a professional piece of writing, submitting a professional piece of writing. What I really love about this chart in my location is that the moon is in an exact applying trine with Mercury as well, while Mercury rules the hour. So it's quite a lovely chart from the 4 Mercury things. Saturn is ruling the ascendant, and it is a night chart, but Saturn is entering a pretty nice part of its phase right now where he's less grumpy. And I love Saturn when Saturn's not grumpy. This idea of when Saturn's not grumpy is from Picatrix in particular. They say, the sages in Picatrix say that the phase of Saturn that is the best to work with Saturn is when Saturn is a morning star. And while Saturn has not yet quite emerged from under the beams, that happens when it's 15 degrees away, it's getting there. Saturn's no longer combust, and so there is a newness to the ascendant ruler at this time. And so Saturn in this part of its phase is a bit more friendly than usual. So this wouldn't be a bad time for writing a message to Saturn if that's up your alley. If you have some way that you would like to align yourself with Saturn, write it down. I think it'll take in this moment and give. If the moon's in Virgo still in your location, that's a little tricky because that puts it in the 8th. But its next aspect would still be to Mercury, and that would actually have reception at that point. So still okay. Just be a little bit more mindful of like draining on your energy. Like if there's something that feels like kind of a suck, like you're putting too much into something and not getting enough out. That's a theme that I see with elections in where the moon is in the 8th. So just be mindful of that. But otherwise, like still looking for that planetary hour of Mercury with Mercury rising and the moon applying to Mercury. There's a lot of Mercury here, and that's something that we haven't had for a while. Mercury is moving into a place where it has a decent amount of essential dignity as well as reception from its ruler. So we're going to be seeing more and more Mercury charts as we move on. I did mention the sun in the 2nd house in Pisces, but it's also Jupiter there. So there's optimism around finances or optimism around resources, although Jupiter is going under the beams of the sun at this time. And so it might be that things are needing to be revised, or there's the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. And so when things are ending, you can still be optimistic about them, right? That's kind of the situation here. Because we're going to start again, and it's still going to be great. Oh, yes, another Pisces rising, the 20th, Sunday morning at 7:06 a.m. What's so nice about this Pisces rising, as opposed to any of the ones that we've had so far, is that now the sun's in the first sign as well. And with that, it promotes visibility more. It promotes a greater sense of showing up and confidence and leadership and these things that Jupiter can do on its own, but when the sun is there too, gives it a little extra boost. So even though the Jupiter is under the beams at this moment, which can connect to working behind the scenes or doing something a little bit invisible, the sun in the first house just brings a lot of light to the first house. It brings a lot of vitality and energy, which can sometimes, like when the sun's in Aquarius in the 12th, might feel a little bit less accessible, which is what we've been working with up to this point when we've been looking at Pisces risings. The moon. The moon is in Libra in my location. It's at 18 degrees of Libra. And so this puts it in a trine with Saturn that's separating, and it's applying to Venus with reception. So it's applying to its ruler, which is really lovely. But this election is not about the moon. You know, this is an election where the moon is in the 8th house. And again, what I said about, you know, the threats of like energy being drained and feeling taxed, right? Like that language of the 8th house and taxes, feeling taxed by something, maybe feeling taxed by relationships in particular, makes sense with the moon in this aspect with the ruler of the 12th, where, you know, the 12th is also housing the ruler of the 7th. And so as much as, you know, we are appearing very strong ourselves, there might be a sense in which that power, that strength is being offered in a way where it's feeling a little bit sapped. And so how to work with that? I don't know. But the fact that the 8th house moon is being received by this 11th house Venus, maybe there's a reason that you're doing this, like a long-term reason with those planets being in Capricorn, and that you're really trying to build a relationship that's going to last. And so in order to do that, you might have to make some sacrifices in terms of your energy in the moment. However, the trine to Saturn does help a little bit with boundaries, right? I've been thinking a lot about dark houses lately and shadow and owning shadow. Like, yeah, I was talking to a friend recently about what shadow is and how to handle it and what the state of shadow is in the world at the moment, and like a sort of cultural disposition towards shadow. And I agree with him with this idea that I think we live in a time where people are really afraid of admitting that they have shadow, that there are things about everybody. Every person has these, you know, sometimes we fuck up. Sometimes we, as good as our intentions might be, that there are slippages, then that nobody's perfect, essentially. And to own that is so powerful, because we're not trying to fake anything, you know? And to lead from that place can be very powerful. I think it's relevant to talk about shadow here because not only do we see a lot of planets in dark houses with the moon in the 8th, Mercury and Saturn in the 12th, these places where the light does not reach the ascendant. And so it can feel hidden from us, or like it's counter to our purposes. You know, this Jupiter on the ascendant being this, you know, upright individual, like really trying to do your best, right? And yet there are these ways when shit happens. Like we don't control ourselves completely, and we shouldn't try to. We should try to be honest. And with the moon, and so shadow in this chart is not only in the dark houses with that emphasis in those houses, but also the connection between the moon and Jupiter by Antition, which I'll have to do a video on at some point. But if you want to learn more about Antition and Antisha, the plural of Antition, basically check out Kate Petty's website. It'll be in the video description. Awesome astrologer who uses so many different techniques and different styles of astrology, from Uranian to Vedic to traditional Western. And she works a lot with Antition, and it's a shadow thing. It's a shadow thing. And so I'll let you explore that. And our last selection for the week is Monday, the 21st at 10:25 p.m. It's got Scorpio rising. Mars, once again, is in Capricorn. We're still working with this exalted and bona fide Mars. Hooray. The moon's in Scorpio here. So depending on your location, make sure that the moon is not applying to Saturn at this point. I mean, the moon is applying to Saturn in my location, but it's contacting Jupiter before that. And so that's really, really important that we're not getting the application to Saturn, because that would be a pretty debilitating condition. But with the trine to Jupiter, this moon in the first house is capable of doing some good for the first house, doing some good for the individual, particularly through third and fifth house things. So whether that's locale or ritual or creativity or sex, camaraderie, I would say, is a good combination of this, like something that's really fun. This is a great party night. I know it's Monday, so maybe you can somehow get a party going on Monday night. This is a great time for that. Maybe there's some kind of magical component of it too, with the third house also being about magic in different ways. I really like that idea of magic for this too, because Mercury is angular here. Mercury is down there on the IC. And with Mercury, I think about like the magician card in tarot, and like the tools that are at your disposal being all you need, and that there's so much creativity within just a few things, that you can do so much with just a few things. And I think there's a resourcefulness of this chart once again with the moon, with this exalted Mars and an earth sign. There's more water in this chart with the moon. So compared to the last Scorpio rising, and we saw where the moon was in Virgo, now we've got this moon in Scorpio. And so I think when there's an emphasis in water, there's an emphasis on flow. There's an emphasis on going with the flow, so to speak. And so at the level of movement, think about what that feels like in your body to move in a way like water, and what it's like to move with others like water, not just physically, but also at the level of socialization, like these third house ideas of like communicating in a watery way, or socializing in a watery way. Water fills the container that it's in. And in doing that, it connects across all sides of the container. Water on one side of the container will then be on the other side. And so there's an ability to move around and to be flexible with water, similar to air, but air is busier. Water is more viscous than air. It's slower, right? When you move through water, you can't run, right? Like running in water just never goes well. So the slowness aspect of water, I think, is really powerful for soothing us, in the same way that air can be really busy and like the mind can almost spin out sometimes. Water is the kind of flow that helps us find peace. And so even though the moon's in Scorpio here, which is not necessarily a peaceful signature, the trine to Jupiter is. And so maybe it's about going to those depths in a way where you trust that they will be tended to and that they will be healed, rather than, the sort of crisis that can sometimes come up when the moon is in Scorpio. So this is a chart where the depths are a little bit less scary than usual. And what it would be like to go to those depths with another person, and to do so not in a controlling way where we're like really, locked into a certain perspective. Like this is a fixed chart, right? So we want to be mindful of being overly fixed about things. We're generous in these depths, and we're flexible in these depths. And so this is a really beautiful way to tell the story of Jupiter, I think. So consider how you could tell that story for yourself, whether it's like in a social setting or in a ritualistic setting, or if there's something that you're writing, again, with the third house emphasis here and the Mercury emphasis, really good chart for writing as well. Writing about personal things with the moon being in the first. The moon's also being received by Mars, like after these aspects to Jupiter and Saturn, there's that reception with Mars. So Yeah, the third house emphasis becoming a little bit stronger there. And that is going to do it for this episode of Elections Weekly. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. And also remembering to like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps out my work on this channel. And before I let you go once and for all, I would also really, really appreciate it if you would join my newsletter, which will be linked in the video description. And the reason I'm asking for this at this time is because we recently got some indications from many of the big social media platforms that it's going to be harder for astrologers to get our content in front of you. And so it's becoming more and more important for us to have our own ways of contacting you that don't depend on algorithms. And the main way that that can happen is with newsletters and good old-fashioned email. So my newsletter is not simply like self-promotion or like asking for things. It's very content driven. I try to be very helpful with the information that I provide in that newsletter. And like, for example, my last one, it was like a 5-page, like nice, like imagistic kind of thing where I was exploring the debility of the sun in Aquarius and ways to explore remediation at this time through that transit. So I think a lot of people found it really helpful in offering some remediation tips. Remediation is something that I have been exploring mostly in my newsletter. So if that's a topic that you're interested in, that's the place to do it. So I would love to see you there. Thank you so much for joining me here and everywhere, and I will see you next week.